You're watching Adorama TV.
Hi everybody, welcome to Adorama TV. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, today we're going to be talking about the 5D Mark III. It's Canon's newest camera that just came out this month. And this one that I have here was sent to me by Canon, and it has the body, which runs $3,500 if you just buy the body. But it also comes in a kit with a 24 to 105 L lens, an f4 lens. And with the kit, it's $4,300, and that's what I tested. So I tested the 5D Mark III with a 24 to 105 L lens, and I love this camera. And so what I did is I actually got together with a bunch of my friends that also have a 5D Mark III. We had lunch, we went to downtown Phoenix, and we shot a bunch of samples. So I want to show you the samples and talk about my shooting experience first, and then we'll dive in and we'll talk about some of the geeky stuff and have some tech joy and talk all about the menus and the sensor and all that kind of stuff. But first, let's look at some pictures. And I've got these in my iPad, and just so I know exactly what I'm talking about, I'm going to be looking at these. We'll show these to you on screen. We'll start off here by this picture that I shot. And this is a picture of my friend Craig. We shot this in low light in a restaurant when we were getting ready to go out and shoot. And you can see that this is shot at a really low light, and it's an ISO 2500. And if you zoom in on this sort of over by his ear and those the background image, that nice bokeh there, you can see that it's got almost no noise. And so it's a really nice pleasing grain. And so for wedding shooters, event photographers, and this was with zero flash, so there's no flash at all in this picture, and this was in a really dim room. You can see that this is really going to be a great camera for you because the possibilities are really opened up with the dynamic range and the ISO range. This actually goes all the way up to 25,600 ISO, and you can even expand that all the way down to an ISO of 100. So I love that. Well, the other thing I wanted to check is this has a new metering system, and I wanted to see how that metering system actually behaved. And so we found this building with this really nasty glare, and you can see here. Now on other cameras we tried, the metering just got this wrong because that glare coming off that building made everything underexposed because it was trying to correct for that. And the 5D Mark III had no problem getting this shot, and you can see that the exposure is correct, and that's the actual building. It looks just like that, and so I love that. I also wanted to check out some of the tonality, so if we could find some details in the shadows and highlights and how it handled color. So I shot this picture of this building, and it's got this sort of mirrored glass here, and you can see that it really does a great job of pulling out color as well as details in the shadows and the highlights. You can see that those silver pillars over there look great. The graduations are really, really nice, and so this was in nice daylight. Now I also wanted to check and look at the colors for scenic photography as well as specifically the greens for plants and flowers and stuff. And so here's a shot I took really close, and I shot this with my the 105mm lens, and I was able to get really nice and close to this plant, and you can see that those greens are nice and saturated, and it's really crystal clear, and I really liked how that looked. You can see that the textures and patterns here, this is a building with just a bunch of windows. It looks really, really nice. I wanted to try open shade, and so I had my friend Craig be our model for this. He's probably going to beat me up. He doesn't know he's in this video. But here he is in this open shade, and I was really trying to test to see again, dynamic range. How would this expose with him right on the edge of that open shade in this back alley with a lot of dark areas in there? And you can see that it does a great job of pulling out all those details. I wanted to try out the in-camera raw processing, so I wanted to have a really high contrast image, black and white, of these papers here. And so you can see the blacks are absolutely black. The whites are really nice, got a lot of detail. So these menus here look great in black and white. I wanted to also check out the saturation, so to really saturate colors. I took a picture of this building that has all these colors and reflections and details. And you can see, again, the 5D Mark III does a spectacular job of capturing all of those tonalities. And speaking of dynamic range, I wanted to test the built-in HDR capability and the dynamic range of the camera. So in Phoenix on this day, you can see that in this picture we actually have the moon in the sky. We've got this really bright blue sky, as well as some midtones, and then in the foreground we have those trees. And this is just the normal image as I shot it. And I turned on the HDR, built-in HDR capabilities, and took 3 more shots and had the camera put those together. And you can see that we have the normal image, the underexposed image, the overexposed image, and then the final image that was put together by the camera. Now, in my experience with just this one experiment, it didn't do as much as I expected, so I wanted more to be pulled out of those trees in the foreground, and I didn't get that. So it looks very similar to what the original out-of-camera image looked like. So I think I needed to go and tweak that a little bit more to get better results from the HDR. But I was really impressed with how the camera lined everything up and put everything together. I shot all of this handheld, so I think with a little bit more experience and learning how to dial this in, I'd get better results. But for what it's worth, that's what I got with those experiments, which was really limited. Now this image here, this is a salt and pepper shaker and some flowers on a table. And if you look at this, you can see that it has just a little bit of noise, and it might not be the quality that you would expect out of this camera until you realize that this is just a cropped portion of this image. And this image was shot through a window on the sidewalk, and that is really impressive that I could get that close and that cropped and see that much detail, and it looks that nice. And so again, the 5D Mark III was just impressive over and over and over again. The colors, here's a Phoenix that I shot. This is some art in downtown Phoenix. These are right out of cameras, really nice saturated colors. I really like that. Again, I wanted to check to see if I could get some of that really gritty, almost over-sharpened look. And so this was an image that I processed in RAW. I really love how I got all these details in this no parking sign right here. This would make a great backdrop for a screensaver or something. Here's another image that I shot to check out the focus, the close focus of this lens specifically, and to see how sharp it was. I was really impressed. And then just another image here of Starbucks to see how the greens and the blues and all that kind of stuff, the specular highlights, how that would work. And again, just great results. So that's my experience shooting just for an afternoon with the 5D Mark III. And what I kept saying, and we had about 3 other photographers that all had 5D Mark IIIs, and all I could hear over and over again was, whoa, that is amazing, that is spectacular, that is unbelievable. And so my personal experience with the camera, just totally subjective, is I was blown away by this camera's capabilities. So that's my subjective experience. Let's talk about some of the geeky stuff, the technical specs, so you can really dig in and talk about this. Well, this is not, the question I've been getting on Twitter and Facebook is this camera worth the extra $1,000 over the 5D Mark II? And I really want to make sure that you understand something. This is not a 5D Mark II with some upgrades. It is a totally separate camera, and it's brand new. So it shares the same name, but it's sort of like comparing a 1976 Corvette to a 2012 Corvette. They're the same car, but really they're not. They say they share the same name, but everything has changed. Different engine, different everything, different technology. And that's the same thing with the 5D Mark III over a 5D Mark II. Really, this is a totally new design, all new technology, new sensor, new image processing, new autofocus system, and so it's really more of a 7D and a 1DX combined, and very little of the 5D Mark II is in this camera. So is it worth the extra $1,000? I think it's a no-brainer that if you're looking at a 5D Mark II or a 5D Mark III, that a 5D Mark III is well worth the $3,500 that it costs. So let's talk about why that is. First of all, this is a 22 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor, and also the viewfinder has 100% coverage. So when you're looking through there, you see everything that the sensor sees, which is really nice. The ISO is amazing. So it goes from 100 all the way up to 25,600, and that's expandable. And so you can shoot in just about any lighting condition. And even though this is a 22 megapixel camera, which means that those pixels are really small, the noise is very low, even up to ISO of 12,800 and up in that range. And so it's very pleasing. So if you're shooting wedding receptions or events, you're going to be able to shoot things that that normally you wouldn't be able to shoot, and you'll sell more photos. And because you're selling more photos, it'll pay for itself, this camera will. The other thing that I noticed right off the bat is on the back of the screen here. Let me see if I can bring up an image. This screen is extremely bright. It's extremely clear. It's almost like looking into a 3D TV when you're looking at your images on the back of this. And that's what everybody says when they see this camera for the first time, is like, wow, that is really impressive. It's like a little movie screen. So this is a very high resolution 3.2-inch LCD, and it's got some glare to it, but not as much as previous, the 5D Mark II. So outside, it really helps you dial in the exposure. A couple other things that are different about this: you can see that there's a totally different redesign on the back. So there's a bunch of buttons here that sort of show you that the playback features have been totally revamped, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later. This dial and where these different lock switches are totally different. The on-off switch is now at the top of the camera. These haven't changed too much. One of the things that people love about this is the depth of field preview button right here is now big and huge, and you can get right to it, as opposed to the 5D Mark II, which was this little button that was sort of on the side. So that's right there. It's big and beefy. And then there's also a customizable switch, so you can program this switch here, this multifunction switch on the top, to do and behave and do things that you want it to do. And so that's really nice. On the side, if I open up this, there's now 2 slots, so that you can put an SD card and a CF card, and you can shoot to both of those at the same time, or one and then the other. So you've got automatic backup sort of right there built in, and you can shoot and choose which card works best for you. On the side, there's been some improvements. So in addition to the stereo microphone for video recording, there's now a headphone jack, and so now you can listen to what you're recording, which is really nice, and you can make sure that there's no air pops or plosives or things like that. So that's very, very nice. The HDMI out is great. It's still compressed, and so some cameras, most notably the Nikons, have uncompressed HDMI. This is still compressed, so there's room for improvement there. Some of the things on the menu settings have been totally revamped, and so now you can look at images side by side. So you can push this little button here, and you can start viewing images side by side and compare those. There's built-in RAW processing, so if you want to take a RAW image, convert it to a black and white, and save a new image from that RAW file, you can do that all in camera. You can really dial those in. I wish we had time to go through that, but that'd be about a 10-minute tutorial to show you how to do that. But it's really, really powerful. I want to talk to you about one of the most significant upgrades and changes to this camera, and that is the movie recording. And so it still has 1080p 30 video recording, just like the 5D Mark II, but now it has an external headphone jack. It's got stereo mic for audio, which the 5D Mark II had. But a couple of big, huge improvements that are made here. One is now the live view switch. This is stolen from the 7D. You have a live view switch here for movie recording, and you can set up how everything behaves for that. And then you have a live view switch for still recording, and you can set up the display for that. So you're not having to compromise what you're getting from live view for both things. So you can program those independently. The other thing that is really nice is when you're recording a movie, when you're making adjustments to the settings on some cameras, and most notably the 5D Mark II, when you make those adjustments, you hear clicks. So if you're not using an external microphone, you'll hear those adjustments being made. So what Canon has done is now, as you're recording, this wheel right here is touch sensitive. So I push this little Q button, and as I start pushing this, it's sort of like an iPad screen where it just sort of senses what's going on, and you can roll things in and out, and that makes zero noise. So it makes no noise at all, and that really helps you when you're shooting video, because now you can go in and you can dial in settings, change exposure, change the sensitivity of the microphone, and it doesn't impact your audio at all, which is really, really nice. Now, one thing that I did notice with this lens that should be noted, if you have an IS lens and you're shooting video, the servos, little motors inside the lens, are noisy enough to be picked up by the internal microphone. So if you're shooting with an IS lens, make sure you turn off the IS, or else that's going to come into your recording. Now, the other huge thing about the movie recording that is significant with the 5D Mark III is now you can record almost 30 minutes continuously. So it's like 29 minutes and 59 seconds, I believe. So it's it's effectively 30 minutes of recording, as opposed to previously on the 5D Mark II, you could only record up to about 10 minutes. Now, you'll have to have a big card, a fast card to do that, but now for interviews and shows and webcasts and things like that where you need more than that 10 minutes, you've got a camera that will allow you to do that. Now, the other huge, significant improvement to this camera is the autofocus system. So what's happened, a lot of people thought that the 5D Mark III would take the autofocus system from the 7D, which was a great and is a great autofocus system, but they didn't do that. What they did is they took the autofocus system from the 1DX, so the flagship D-series top-of-the-line Canon camera. They took that autofocus system and put it in this camera. And that has not been done since the days of film, with the lower end cameras having the best autofocus system Canon has to offer. So it's a 61-point autofocus system. So for sport shooters, low light shooters, environmental shooters, it doesn't matter what you're shooting, you're going to be able to use an autofocus system that works for you. It's got 41 cross-type autofocus points and 5 dual diagonal autofocus points. And these are optimized for 2.8 lenses. And this f4 lens also allows you to get some of that benefit as well. And the nice thing about that is in the menu system, there is a new menu system just for the autofocus system to dial in exactly how you're shooting. And so there are these different settings, and you can look at those, and it makes it easy to choose the autofocus system that works for you. Now, the other thing I mentioned earlier is the metering system. This has a 63-zone IFCL metering system, and that really helps the Digic 5 processor go in there, look at what the scene is doing, and choose the metering that is correct for what you're shooting. And so it sort of makes it effortless when you're trying to get difficult scenes to meter correctly. This shoots up to 6 frames per second, so it's pretty speedy for sports shooters. It has, as I mentioned earlier, in-camera HDR processing. It also now has multiple exposures, so you can do multiple exposures for people that have been wanting that. The auto bracket goes plus or minus 8 EV, and so you can do dynamic range in post-production using Photoshop or whatever image processing you want. So you can go in there and really get a broad range of dynamic range and not have to do that in manual mode. Now you can do plus or minus 8 EV, which is pretty impressive. The other thing that is new with this camera is JPEG processing, and even this throws us in the metadata and RAW, is that chromatic aberration correction is now built in to this camera. And so it recognizes what lens is on the camera, and of course this is for Canon only lenses. So when you put on a Canon lens, the camera knows what lens that is. It's familiar with the chromatic aberration that that lens has, and it will do in-camera correction for that, which is spectacular. And then there's all kinds of other things. There's a rate button, so you can rate things and say this is the best of. So there's a lot of things that you can do with this camera in the field by rating, doing image comparisons, by changing your raw processing, making new images out of that. There's also a bunch of upgrades that you can add. There's the new 600EX flash that's optimized for this camera and the 1DX camera. There is a GPS hot shoe mount that you can put on there, so if you're geotagging your images, this camera can do that. There's a Wi-Fi transmitter, there's a battery grip, there is a lot of things. So this is an entire ecosystem of new camera goodness. And so the question is this camera spectacular? Yes. Is it the best camera I have seen at this price point? Yes. This is a mind-blowing, awesome camera. Again, it's $3,500 for this body. If you want the body and this lens, this is a 24-105, it's $4,300. So the bottom line is you will be highly impressed with this camera. It's easy to use right out of the box with a lot of power to dial it into the way you work in the future. So if you're on the fence wanting to know if you should buy it, I say go out and get it right now or maybe yesterday, because it is a spectacular camera. Well, thanks for joining me this week. Remember, if you have questions about photography gear, you can send those questions to me at askmark@adorama.com.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center, where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit Adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.